Let's learn Hechaltzu a little bit here. We're on chapter 24. So the Rebbe said, the Rashab said, he explained to us that there's two aspects to Chochmah, and that the second aspect is indicated by the bottom point of the Yud, which is called the Kaitz, and it's inclined and curves towards the left, which means it's inclined towards the Hey of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the first Hey, which is Bina, because that is the position in Chochmah that already allows for the emergence of Bina. Let's continue inside the next chapter. It's explained elsewhere at length. There's a concept that both Chochmah and Bina have a separate makor, a separate source in the nefesh. And because it has two separate sources, it manifests itself later in two separate aspects of creativity, which is Chochmah, and Bina, which is the application or the development. Let's see what he says further. Ve'einem tluyim zeh bazeh. Chochmah and Bina are not dependent one on the other. That's why, what do we see? There are certain people that are very creative when it comes to analysis and development. They're a disaster. They can't do it. Other people are great in analytics. When it comes to creativity, they can't do that. They're weak in that area. So the Rashab says, because Eina tluyim zeh b'zeh, one is not dependent on the other. The Hagam shoneroyim sheyesh yichud, even though we see that there is a unity v'chibur l'chochmah bina zeh im zeh, we do find an adjacent closeness between the two. U'kamoy, for example, hanekuda de chochmah shaboli de asoga de bina, the flash point, the geometric point, the idea of chochmah comes to be later understood and comprehended by bina. And you cannot have the comprehension of Bina without having an idea, without having the Chochmah. So from this we see that there is a relationship between the two. And he gives an example, just as it's impossible for there to be a river without a wellspring. The whole river, Yoini, from where does it come from? From a mayan. If there's no mayan, there's no river. We're not talking about an artificial river. We're talking about a real river. So what, in the analogy, what is the mayan? Chochmah, the creative idea. What is the expansiveness of the idea? It's comparable to the nahar, to the river. So this implies, seemingly, that there is a connection between the two, and that one cannot be without the other. And so too, every wellspring, every mayan, if what happens when it comes out, it develops into an expansion, i.e. a river. So again, we see that from both sides, both from the side of the Mayan and both from the side of the Nahar, the river, there's a connection between the two. U'kameikein, that's the analogy. So too in the moral, u'kameikein, kol nekuda de chochmah, every geometric point, flash of chochmah, of creativity, bo lidei hasoga sabina. It comes to its fruition through the full development and comprehension of what we call Bina. V'chol ha'asoga de Bina, he bought minikudas the Chochmah. And all comprehension and development must have as its source, as its root, an idea. Because if you develop something and you don't have the idea there, ultimately it's a bad idea. It doesn't go anywhere. It has to have a yesod, a foundation. The nekudas hachachma, the idea is the yesod. And once you have a yesod, you can have the development of the yesod, of the foundation. Here ends the rhetorical question of the Rashab. And now comes his retort. Zehu, this that we just said in the last 4 lines or so, rak mipnei shemiskalalim umisachtim zem bezeh. It's only because there is an inclusiveness and a unity between Chochmah and Bina. Aval be'emes, but in truth, einam tluyim zeh bazeh. They're not dependent one on the other. So here, Yisr is making a very refined difference. The difference between dependence and association. I want you to think about that. Association doesn't mean that I depend on you. It means I'm associated with you, but I don't depend on you. You're not my father, you're not my mother, you're a friend, you're a student, it's good to be with you, fine. But totally b'cha, I'm dependent on you, that without you I can't exist, not true. The Rashab says the same is true for Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah and Bina have their own place in the nefesh. When they come into their state of application, they use each other, but they don't depend on each other. Let's continue. Sheyesh l'kolecha mokar miyuchad. Each one, Sai Chochmah and Sai Bina, has an independent source. V'yochaliyas ha-chochmah b'loi Bina. And it could be, there should be pure Chochmah without Bina, u'Bina b'loi Chochmah. U'kamoi, and he gives, for example, next page, we see in actuality, yes, Mishu Bal, this is what I said earlier. Yes, Mishu Bal Havonu, Balamso, Lahamtsi, Hapsoi, Sichlias, Kadoshis, Bucholes. There's someone who's so creative, he can come up with constantly new ideas, the inventor. However, Ve'ena Bal Hasoga Klal, he can't put it into practice because he isn't able to take the idea, the genius idea, from its inception to actualization. To comprehend it very well in detail, so that it sits and dwells well in the person's head. No, he can't do that. He's not strong in that area. And then there are some that are very strong in comprehension. They are very strong in comprehending something very well. And it sits well in their mind. But they can't come up, they're not creative. They're not creative. They understand it, they've developed it, but that power of creativity to take that thing that I understand now well and to come up with a new idea, new creation, zilch, nada, efes, they can't do that. Kiyim, rather, what can they do? Is mevin, umasik, they can understand, b'seichel, shekvar nimsa. Once you give them a logic, once you give them an idea, shekvar nimsa, it's already found, it already exists. They take it from here and go further with it. But to come up with a creative idea, they don't have any power. They don't have that talent. Hainu, mashashama muzulase. They can take something that they heard from their friend, or they found something written in a sefer, and they take that thing that's written and they develop it. That's Bina Isser. But they on their own, without the sefer, and without their friend sharing some idea with them, they cannot create a new idea. That's not their strength. Creativity. They're not creative. We'll make it short. Hagam shal piarev yovid nekudas hachochma liasoga de bina. Although usually an idea will come to its realization through through comprehending and developing. Nevertheless, lepamim shlayim tzatam b'seichel usfara b'malahaz lahazuloses nekudas haskola shalai. Guess what, Velvel? They won't be able to explain the idea. In other words, they get an idea and then they develop it. Ask them to tell you how'd you come up with the idea. They can't. They have no talent at all in creativity. So the world of creativity is closed to them. That's because that their soul is a bina-like soul. And not only can they not share with others the idea, but even to themselves they are weak in understanding the idea. Again, they take an idea, they develop the idea, they explain the idea excellent, well, but to be able to tell you what is the idea, how did I come up with the idea and all that, they can't tell you. As we see in the Gemara, Bedin, he brings the Gemara in Beya, a chick that was hatched on Yom Tiv, Rav Osar. Rav says it's forbidden because it's Neilad. It's something born on Yom Tiv and it's forbidden. So these two Chachamim ask, what's the difference between a chick that's born on Yom Tiv and a calf that's born from a treifa animal? And what's the halacha? Over there, it's what? It's permitted to be slaughtered and eaten on the festival. Right? Mamanushach. If the question they asked him was, if Efroyach Shenoilad B'Yom is Noilad, then why isn't a Egel Shenoilad Minatreifa from a also Noilad, and it should be forbidden to be eaten? And the halach is it's not. Shosak Rav, very famous words. Rav was silent. He didn't have what to answer. Right, Hillel? He didn't find an adequate explanation to discern between the two cases. So you would think that Rav changed his opinion because, like we say in good old yeshivish language, he was upgefrekt, upgeschlagen, right? I got you, right? Right? The Gemara says, Rav did not change his opinion. He still, even though he couldn't explain the difference between this scenario and that scenario, and that's why he was silent, he didn't have an explanation, he didn't change his opinion. Why? Because in his chachma, a egg born on the Yom Tov is forbidden. In other words, the intuition of that creative flash told him it's forbidden. How to explain it? He couldn't. When he was questioned and challenged. Look further. You hear this? Gewaldig example. In Chochmah, Rav knew that he's right. When it came to Bina, he couldn't explain it. So he kept quiet. But it doesn't mean that he changed his opinion. Because the intuition was by him so strong that he knew that this is right. How am I going to explain it? I can't. Maybe someone greater than me can. The Rashab uses this example to show you that there could be Chochmah b'lei Bina. Now, I want to tell you, Chevra, got to be very careful because Velvel's here a doctor, Isser's a doctor, and they'll come up with some creative idea, and their colleagues will come to them and said, could you prove your hypothesis? And they won't be able to, and they won't change their mind, and they'll go and do what they came up with. Well, they could be sued and fired. But we're talking about an idea. In other words, can it be possible that something resonates? That's the word I'm looking for, Isser, and resonating. Something resonates in you. This, I know it's right. I know this is the way it should be. I can't explain it. That's Chokhmah. That's coming from a place called Chokhmah. And Chokhmah isn't always able to be explained through Bina. That's what he says. Ubina b'lei Chokhmah. And then sometimes you can have Bina without Chokhmah. In other words, you're very good in developing and explaining, but you don't have the power of creativity. The Rashab goes back to his thesis in this chapter. That's because each has a separate source in the nefesh, in the soul. Each one has a source for itself. The Chokhmah shorsha mimul v'noitzin. Chokhmah takes itself from what's called mazel of noitzer. I'll explain soon, I believe. Ubina, and Bina takes itself from Vinake. These are part of the Yud Gimel Midas Urachim. Hashem, Kelech, Apayim, Loitzu Chesed, Alofim, Loitzu Veshem Chatov, Vinake. That's what it's referring to. Shehem Beis, next page. Shehem Beis, Mikodesh Miyuchodim. These are two separate places, Zemizeh. Ube'emes, Heim Afochim Zemizeh. The Rashab says not only are they separate, they're contrary. The Noitzer Lashon Shmira. The word Noitzer is associated, it means Shmira, to guard. He says, see over there. What does it mean, Shmira? Shmira means don't expand, don't extend. Shamor, just stay to yourself, guard yourself. Ayin, be in a state of nothingness, of humility, of subservience. Umazel v'nake, but the v'nake from the Gimel Sarachim, that mazel, who in v'oise chesed, it's associated with doing chesed, with ispashtus, with expansion. That's the idea of expanding and specifically becoming a yesh, not in an arrogant sense, but in existence, emergence of existence. And this is the idea that both aspects of Chokhmah Bina, they come from the mazel called Noitzer and Venake. Right? The Noitzer, again, both of those are part of the Gimel Serachim. The Chokhmah, he explains further. Chokhmah is the idea of nothingness and subservience. Chokhmah, creativity, seeks to make meyesh from existence la'ayin. Right? Nothing. In other words, you look at the heap, you look at a car, right? You look at a car, Yoini, and you don't see the car, you see the metal, which was a heap of metal made into a car. So you work backwards. You're making of the yesh, of the car, ayin, nothing, meaning it's not, what is it, a car? It's a bunch of metal. And it was put together metal. So metal, the state of a heap of a pile of metal, pre-making it into a car, is considered ayin in comparison to yesh. Therefore, Chokhmah is called the power of what is. It's in its essence, it is mazeh. I don't know what it is because it's ayin. Because Chokhmah itself, in its very core, is humility and subservience. This is when Chokhmah is just one nekuda, one point. Which means it's the contrary, the lack of, the opposite of expansion. The poyo p'chinas habitl b'chol dover, and this idea of hedreis pashtus impacts everything to be in a state of humility. That's why Chochmah is called Re'iyah, Ezel Chochem, it says in Pirkei Avos, Arayis HaNoiled, who sees the future. Sharaya B'chol Davar, Chochmah sees in everything, Who Noiled Me'ayin, how it is born from nothingness. It came from nothingness to Yesh. And this is how Bittul is drawn, it comes to be. Because Chochmah brings about in every state of Yesh Ayin. This is also referred to as seeing the essence. Re'iyas etzem adover, seeing the essential thing. By day, re'iyas, so etzem, by seeing the essence, nasa b'chinas habitul b'mitzias dafke, not only you have the obliteration of self, but the whole concept of existence is naught. This we call in Chassidus, Chabad Chassidus language, bittul b'mitziut, bittul b'mitzias. Ukemoi, for example, go to see a Moshe Myers, Ukemoi harayas hamelech, someone who sees a king who completely is subservient, annulled. You see the king, you stop. You become out, garnish, zero. The king's here. I see the king. As it's explained at length elsewhere, the difference between seeing and listening. So we have these two aspects also within the point of Chochmah. Even when it comes into revealed Chochmah, nevertheless, it's still above the idea of listening, of hearing. What's felt in the situation is its essence. When you mazel v'noitzer. So this is, as he said before, this is the mazel of the 13 attributes mitzarachamim called noitzer. Shuam shochas b'chinos ha'ayin v'abitl. It's the drawing down into the world the concept of ayin, of subservience, humility. Ubina nimshach, and bina comes with mazel v'nake from another mazel which is called v'nake. Shehu lasi says pashas b'chinos yesh dafka. That's just the opposite, to make expansion from the yesh. That's by comprehending and development and length and in width. So the sensitive, refined idea comes into a way where you could grasp it. There is an advantage which it being more inner, because then the person's vitality, his energy, and his pleasure of godliness is felt more deeper inside. I'm not going to explain that. This is the concept of mazel v'nake, the nake, hamshochas p'chinas hayesh. Again, he says this is the focus on the yesh, on existence. V'nimtza, what we understand from this, the p'chinas chochmah bina, the source of their of them being noitzer and nake, hemafachim zem is are not only different, they're opposite each other. That's why there could be chokhmah without bina, ubina b'lei chokhmah, because they're two not only separate, but they're opposite each other. Each one has a separate source. As I said earlier, nevertheless, usually, usually Chochmah does come into Bina. That's because of the inclusiveness, the Chochmah Bina, they include each other. So too in their source, but Mazel, they go one into the other. Kitzer Chacham Bina Yochel Yizeh Leizeh. Chacham Bina can be one without the other. L'kol echad mokem yuchad mazel v'neitzu v'nake. Each one has a separate source, which is called the mazel of neitzu or the mazel of v'nake. Chacham Bina Mekeireim Chacham Bina and their source are opposite. Uv'chol zeh, nevertheless, miskalim zeh mizeh, they can be inclusive. Chevra, have a great Yom Tov. It's Hey Tev. It's a great day. We'll see everyone to share on Monday. Zay Gesund. Shalom. Bye.